courtroom was filled with a tense silence that seemed to stretch for miles. The flickering of the overhead lights cast long shadows over the faces of the people seated, all waiting for what would be the final decision in a case that had captivated the entire city. Outside, the clouds gathered in a dark storm, as if the heavens themselves were holding their breath in anticipation. The judge, an older man with a stern face, looked down at the defendant, Ben Bradley, a man in his mid-30s who had been accused of a crime so severe it had sent shockwaves through the community. His face was gaunt, eyes hollow, as though the weight of his life had stripped him of his former self. He had once been a man of ambition, with big dreams and even bigger plans. But somewhere along the way, everything had unraveled. The courtroom was filled with whispers as people stared at him, unsure of what to make of the man who had once been a hero to some. Ben sat in the defendant's chair, his hands clasped tightly together, his knuckles white from the pressure. His mind wandered back to the moment when everything had changed. It had been 2 years ago, 2 years since the accident. The day that had taken his life down a path from which he would never return. It wasn't just the pain of losing his future, but the loss of his best friend, his companion, his dog, Brutus. Brutus had been with him since he was a boy. From the very first day they met, Ben had known that he and the large, muscular German shepherd would be inseparable. Brutus wasn't just a dog, he was family. Through thick and thin, Brutus had always been by his side, offering loyalty and unconditional love. And when Ben's world had crumbled, Brutus had been the one to pick up the pieces. But that was before the incident, before the crash that changed everything. The car had come out of nowhere, careening through the intersection at high speed. Ben had tried to swerve, but it was too late. The next thing he remembered was the deafening crash, the twisting metal, and the searing pain as his body was crushed in the wreckage. Brutus had been with him in the car that day. Ben had no memory of what had happened to his dog, only the anguished cry of Brutus as he had tried to crawl out of the wreckage, desperate to help his owner. When Ben had regained consciousness in the hospital, he had been told that Brutus had been taken to the veterinary clinic. He had been devastated to learn that his beloved dog had suffered severe injuries that, despite the best efforts of the vets, would never fully heal. Brutus had been left with a permanent limp, a reminder of the crash that had forever altered their lives. And worse yet, the accident had left Ben with crippling injuries of his own. He had lost his job, his home, and his reputation. He was a man who had been stripped of everything he had once known, including his freedom. The trial had been the last chance he had to salvage something, anything, from the wreckage of his life. Today, in the courtroom, as the prosecution made their case, Ben's thoughts were fixed on one thing: Brutus. He could hear the dog's heavy breathing in his mind, feel the comforting presence of his companion by his side. He had to see him one last time. As the judge called for recess, Ben's voice broke through the silence. "Your Honor," he began, his voice shaky but resolute. "I have one final request. Before you pass judgment, I need to see my dog. Just one last time, please." The request hung in the air like a fragile thread. The prosecutor, a stern woman with sharp features, scoffed at the idea. "This is a courtroom, not a petting zoo," she snapped. But the judge silenced her with a wave of his hand. "I'll allow it," he said, his voice heavy with authority. There was a moment of shock in the room as everyone turned to look at the defendant, a man on trial for a serious crime, asking to see his dog before his fate was sealed. It was almost absurd, and yet there was something about the request that struck a chord with everyone present. The courtroom door swung open, and a familiar, low growl echoed through the hall. A ripple of emotion swept through the spectators as a figure appeared at the door, a massive German shepherd, his eyes still fierce, but filled with a deep sadness. Brutus had aged since the accident, but the bond between him and Ben was as strong as ever. The dog's limp was evident, but he moved with the same determination he always had. Ben's heart leaped in his chest as he saw the dog. It was like seeing a piece of himself again. He had to fight back tears as Brutus slowly made his way toward him, the dog's every step heavy with the weight of the years that had passed. As Brutus reached him, Ben slowly bent down, his body aching with the effort, and placed a trembling hand on the dog's head. The dog licked his face in a gentle, comforting gesture, as if to say, "I'm here, and I always will be." The entire room seemed to hold its breath as Ben and Brutus shared a moment that was both tender and heartbreaking. It was a moment that no one could have predicted, a moment of raw, unfiltered emotion that transcended the legal proceedings happening around them. The prosecutor, the judge, and even the audience had all been swept up in the power of this connection, this unbreakable bond between man and dog. But then, something unexpected happened as Ben hugged Brutus tightly, whispering to him. A sharp sound cut through the air, a loud crack from the back of the room. Everyone turned in shock, and the air seemed to freeze in place. Brutus, who had been calm moments before, suddenly growled, his body stiffening as his eyes locked onto the door. A figure stood there, framed by the light from the hallway, casting a long shadow in the courtroom. It was a woman, someone no one had expected to see. Her eyes were wide with fear, and her hands were trembling. It was Sarah, Ben's ex-wife, the last person anyone would have expected to show up in this moment. The tension in the room skyrocketed as she stepped forward, her voice shaky, but filled with conviction. I need to speak," she said, her eyes darting to the dog. "That dog, he's not just his dog." The courtroom fell into a stunned silence as Sarah continued. "Brutus is my dog too. He saved me the night of the accident. He's the reason I'm here now. I couldn't leave him, not when he had already saved me once." everyone's gaze shifted from Sarah to Ben, to the dog between them, and then back to Sarah, who now stood trembling with emotion. The woman who had walked away from Ben in the hardest of times. The woman who had left him to bear the weight of everything alone. Now claimed a bond with Brutus that no one had known about. Ben felt a pang of anger mixed with confusion. "You left me," he said, his voice hoarse, his grip tightening on Brutus. "You left me and the dog, and now you come here. What is this about?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears, and she took a hesitant step closer. "I never wanted to leave you, but I couldn't stay. The crash, it broke me. But I've been following the case, Ben, and I couldn't let Brutus, I couldn't let him slip away from both of us. He's the last connection I have to you, to us." As the words hung in the air, the reality of the situation began to sink in. It wasn't just about the courtroom or the trial anymore. It was about a bond that had never been fully understood, a bond that had never been broken despite the passing of time and the pain that both of them had endured. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then slowly, Ben stood, his legs weak beneath him as he faced Sarah. "So what now?" he asked, his voice quiet, filled with a mixture of uncertainty and a faint hope. Sarah looked at him with the same desperation that had once been between them, before everything had fallen apart. "I don't know," she said, her voice trembling. "But I know one thing for sure. Brutus, he deserves better than all this. He deserves to be loved. And maybe, just maybe, we can find a way to give him that." And then, something that no one in that room could have predicted happened. Ben, the man on trial, the man who had lost everything, found something he thought he would never find again. Not just a glimmer of hope, but a chance at redemption, a chance at healing. And in that moment, he realized that his final request had changed everything. Not just for him, not just for Sarah, but for Brutus too, and perhaps, for the first time in a long time, the future didn't seem so uncertain anymore. The courtroom, still heavy with emotion, seemed like a distant memory as Ben stood there, Brutus at his side, Sarah a few feet away. Outside, the storm had started to rage, rain slashing against the windows, as though nature itself was mirroring the intensity of the emotions that filled the air. Ben could hardly process the words Sarah had just spoken, nor the reality of the situation. The woman he had once loved, the woman who had left him in his darkest hour, was standing in front of him again, claiming a part of his life he thought he had lost forever. She wasn't just asking for Brutus. No, it was more than that. She was asking for a chance at redemption for both of them, and perhaps for their beloved dog too. He could feel Brutus shifting beside him, his head raised as if trying to understand the unspoken words that were being exchanged. It was as if the dog, who had always been the silent witness to the pain and joy in Ben's life, was now sensing the turning point of a life-altering decision. "Ben, Sarah began, her voice faltering. "I know I don't have the right to ask for this, But I need you to understand. I couldn't stay. I couldn't handle the weight of it all. The crash, losing everything, losing you. It broke me. But Brutus, her voice cracked, and she paused, as if gathering the courage to continue. Brutus was the one who saved me that night, when everything fell apart. He kept me going. Even when I couldn't bear the thought of facing the world, he stayed by my side. He never left me. And when I heard about the trial, I knew I had to do something. Not just for him, but for us, for the family we used to be. Ben stood in stunned silence, his heart pounding in his chest. The weight of Sarah's words seemed to crush him, making the air feel thick, suffocating. Part of him wanted to scream, to tell her how much she had hurt him by walking away, by leaving him and Brutus to pick up the pieces alone. But another part of him, something softer, something that he hadn't allowed himself to feel in so long, wanted to understand. He had never truly understood why Sarah had left. In his mind, he had always believed she had simply given up, unable to face the wreckage of their lives. But now, standing before him, she was telling a different story, one of loss, of guilt, and of a desperate need for redemption. Could it be possible? Could she really be here for the right reasons? Or was this just another act, another attempt to salvage what little was left of their shattered past? As if sensing Ben's inner turmoil, Brutus let out a soft whine, nudging his head into Ben's hand. The dog's familiar warmth was a reminder of everything Ben had lost, but also everything he still had. The bond between them was unspoken, but it was real. Brutus had never given up on him, not even when the world had crumbled. And now, as Sarah's words echoed in his mind, Ben realized something profound. This wasn't just about him or Sarah. It was about Brutus, about the dog who had given both of them so much, and in return had asked for nothing but love. Ben slowly raised his head, meeting Sarah's gaze. There was pain in her eyes, but also something else, a flicker of hope. It was faint, barely noticeable, but it was there, the same hope that had once existed between them before everything fell apart. "I don't know, Sarah," Ben said, his voice hoarse. "I don't know what to think anymore. I don't know if I can forgive you for leaving me, for leaving us, but I do know this. Brutus doesn't deserve to be caught in the middle of all this. He deserves more than that." Sarah nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. I know that now. I've always known that. I couldn't see it before, but now I see him, I see us, and I realize how much we've all lost." The words hung in the air, as if suspended in time. The weight of what they were saying was heavy, each word pulling at the threads of their past, weaving a complicated tapestry of pain, regret, and the possibility of something more. Could they ever heal? Could they ever rebuild what had once been? Or were they doomed to repeat the same mistakes, to let the darkness of their pasts consume them once more? Ben's eyes shifted to Brutus, who was now sitting calmly at his feet, his head turned slightly, as if listening to the conversation between his humans. For a moment, everything seemed to blur, and it was as though Ben was seeing his life through the eyes of his dog. A life filled with loyalty, with love, and with a deep, unbreakable bond. It was a life that had been marred by tragedy, but also a life that had been saved by the simplest, purest thing, the unwavering love of a dog. "Sarah," Ben said, his voice barely above a whisper, "Brutus, he's not just your dog or my dog. He's our dog. And maybe that's all we can hope for now, to find a way to share him, to share this responsibility." Sarah took a cautious step forward, her hands trembling as she reached out. "I don't expect you to forgive me, not right away," she said softly. "But I want to try. I want to be part of this, to be part of Brutus's life again, if you'll let me." Ben stood still for a long moment, the weight of the decision pressing on him from all sides. He could feel his heart racing, the conflict inside him growing stronger with each passing second. But then he looked down at Brutus, who was now looking up at him with those familiar eyes, eyes full of trust, full of understanding, the same eyes that had never judged him, never abandoned him, even in his darkest moments. It was then that Ben realized that his decision wasn't just about Sarah or himself. It was about Brutus. With a deep breath, Ben finally spoke. "All right," he said, his voice steady but quiet. "You can be part of his life again, but we're going to do this right. No more running away, no more pretending we can just move on. If we're going to share Brutus, we're going to have to do it as a family. And we're going to have to start by being honest with each other." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she nodded, a soft, relieved smile playing at the corners of her lips. "I can do that," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "I can do that." And as the storm raged outside, the three of them, Ben, Sarah, and Brutus, stood together in the courtroom, united by a bond that no tragedy, no trial, no past could ever break. In that moment, they were no longer the broken people they had once been. They were a family, imperfect and scarred, but still bound by love, by loyalty, and by the dog who had always been there, through it all. But as the courtroom doors closed behind them, and the world outside seemed to fade away, they knew that the real journey had only just begun. The road to healing would be long, and the scars would never fully disappear, but in each other, they had found something worth fighting for. And with Brutus at their side, they would face whatever came next together. The end of one chapter and the beginning of another days turned into weeks, and the journey of healing was far from easy. But as the seasons shifted, so too did the hearts of Ben and Sarah. There were moments of doubt, of old wounds threatening to resurface, but there were also quiet moments of connection, of rediscovery, and above all, of forgiveness. Brutus, ever the silent observer, had become the anchor that kept them grounded. His presence, a reminder of the love that still existed between them. No matter how fractured their past had been, he would nudge them in the mornings, urging them to start the day. His soft eyes filled with a wisdom that only a dog could possess. His wagging tail became a symbol of the healing that was slowly taking place, a sign that they were, indeed, moving forward, even if it was one hesitant step at a time. Ben had never imagined that the road to forgiveness would be so complicated, so filled with both heartache and joy. The wounds of the past were deep scars that would never fully disappear. But in the quiet moments shared between him, Sarah, and Brutus, there was a sense of peace that had been missing for so long. It wasn't perfection, far from it, but it was something real, something they could hold on to. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in hues of gold and purple, Ben sat on the porch, Brutus at his feet, Sarah by his side. They were quiet, each of them lost in their own thoughts. Yet there was an unspoken understanding between them. The world outside was peaceful, the storm that had once raged now a distant memory, and in its place was the calm that comes after a long battle. "You know," Ben said, breaking the silence, his voice soft but firm, "I never thought we'd get here. I never thought we'd be sitting here together like this. I thought I was too broken. I thought you were too broken." But he paused, glancing down at Brutus, who was looking up at him with those familiar, trusting eyes. "But we're not anymore." Sarah smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek as she reached for Ben's hand. "I know," she said, her voice full of emotion. "I don't deserve this. I don't deserve to be here with you. But I'm so grateful that you gave me a chance, not just to be a part of your life again, but to be part of his life. Brutus, he saved me more times than I can count. And now, he saved us." The weight of her words hung in the air, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. It was as if they were both letting the enormity of what had transpired sink in, the years of pain and separation finally giving way to something new, something unexpected. They had come so far. They had fought so hard to get to this point, and while the scars would always remain, they no longer defined them. They had become a part of who they were, yes, but they no longer had the power to control their future. Ben looked up at the stars, which were beginning to twinkle in the night sky, their light shining through the darkness like tiny beacons of hope. "You know," he said quietly, "I've been thinking a lot about that day in the courtroom, about what I said, and I realize now that it wasn't just Brutus who needed me. It was us. We all needed each other. We always have." Sarah nodded, her eyes distant as she too looked up at the sky. "I think I've always known that. I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to fix myself. But now, I see that it wasn't about fixing anything. It was about finding the courage to face what we've been through together. We don't have to be perfect. We just have to be willing to try." Ben squeezed her hand gently, a silent promise that he would try. They had both been through so much, and while the pain would never truly disappear, they had learned that love wasn't about perfection. It was about accepting the flaws, the mistakes, the scars, and still choosing to be there for each other. In that moment, Ben knew that what mattered most wasn't the past, but present and the future they had ahead of them as a family. As the night deepened, the sound of crickets filled the air, and Brutus let out a soft bark, as if joining in the quiet celebration of this new chapter in their lives. He trotted over to Ben, resting his head on his lap, his body warm and comforting, as if reminding them that no matter what came next, they would face it together. For Ben, there was a profound sense of peace in that moment, a peace that had eluded him for so long. And as he looked down at Brutus, his loyal companion, he realized that this was the true gift, the gift of second chances, the gift of love that never wavered, even in the face of everything that had tried to tear them apart. And then Sarah spoke again, her voice barely a whisper, but filled with sincerity. "I'm sorry, Ben, for everything. I never meant to hurt you. I never meant to leave. But I understand now that it wasn't just about me. It was about us, all of us. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right." Ben didn't reply immediately. Instead, he pulled her into a tight embrace, one that spoke volumes without the need for words. Sometimes there were no words to say, no explanations needed. The past was the past, and it couldn't be undone. But the future was theirs to shape, together. The days that followed were filled with small but significant moments, shared laughter, quiet evenings, walks with Brutus, and the slow but steady rebuilding of trust. There were still challenges, of course. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, and there would be times when the ghosts of the past would resurface, threatening to undo the progress they had made. But for the first time in a long time, Ben felt hopeful. He felt that, with Sarah and Brutus by his side, he could face whatever came next. And that was all he could ask for. One afternoon, a few months later, as they all sat together in the living room, Brutus curled up at their feet. Ben looked at Sarah and smiled. "You know," he said, "I think we've come a long way. We've been through hell and back, and we're still here. That's got to mean something, right?" Sarah laughed softly, her eyes full of warmth and affection. "It means everything," she said. "It means that we're finally where we're supposed to be." And as the sun set outside, casting a golden glow over their home, Ben knew she was right. This was where they were meant to be together, as a family. They had found their way back to each other, not because they were perfect, but because they had chosen to fight for what mattered most. The love they shared, the bond they had, and the dog who had brought them all together in the first place. With Brutus by their side, they faced the future with courage, with hope, and with the knowledge that no matter what, they would always have each other. And in that simple truth, Ben found his peace.